The auditorium hummed with anticipation as 12-year-old Bethany Crane stood in the wings, her fingers unconsciously tracing the silver cross hanging against her grey dress. Through the gap in the curtain, she could see the judges' table, where Warren Pierce sat with his arms crossed, his expression as cold as January frost. Everyone in Ridgemont knew about Warren Pierce. He had judged every talent competition in the county for 15 years, and in all that time, no one could recall seeing him smile. Bethany's mother had warned her, "Honey, Mr. Pierce doesn't like, well, he doesn't like anything too religious. Maybe you could sing something else, that Broadway song you practiced." But Bethany had prayed about it for 3 weeks, and every time she asked God what to sing, the same answer whispered through her heart, "Tell them about me." Next up, number 47, Bethany Crane. The MC's voice boomed through the speakers. Bethany stepped onto the stage, and the spotlights made her squint. The auditorium at Ridgemont Community Center had been renovated 2 years ago, and the architect had installed these magnificent geometric windows, swirls of teal and pink and coral that caught the afternoon light and painted rainbows across the walls. Bethany had always thought they looked like joy frozen in glass. But right now, facing the sea of shadowy faces, she felt anything but joyful. She walked to the microphone stand. Her grey dress, the one Grandma June had sewn for her last birthday, suddenly felt too plain, too simple. The other girls had worn sequins and sparkles. Bethany just wore a cross. "Name and age," Warren Pierce said without looking up from his scoring sheet. "Bethany Crane, I'm 12 years old. And what will you be performing today?" This came from the other judge, a kind-faced woman named Patricia Dunmore, who taught music at the middle school. Bethany swallowed. "I'll be singing a song I wrote. It's called Grace Reaches Down." Warren Pierce's head snapped up, his eyes, pale grey like weathered stone, fixed on her. "Original composition?" "Yes, sir." "And the subject matter?" Bethany's hands trembled slightly. It's about how Jesus saved me. How he saves all of us, if we let him." The silence that followed could have filled an ocean. Warren Pierce set down his pen very deliberately. "Miss Crane, this is a community talent show, not a church service. Do you have another selection prepared?" Bethany felt her face grow hot. From somewhere in the audience, she heard her mother's sharp intake of breath. Her father would be squeezing her mother's hand now, probably praying under his breath like he always did when things got difficult. This is the song I prepared, sir." "Then I'm afraid you'll need to choose something else or forfeit your slot." Warren's voice was flat, final. "We have 47 other contestants waiting." Patricia Dunmore leaned forward. "Warren, perhaps we could just let her—" "The rules are clear, Patricia. No proselytizing. It's in the guidelines." He looked back at Bethany, and something flickered across his face. Not quite cruelty, but close enough. "Make your choice, Miss Crane." The auditorium felt like it was holding its breath. Bethany could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to choose the safe path, to sing "Somewhere Over the Rainbow" and pretend this hadn't happened. But then she remembered the morning 3 months ago when she had written this song. She had been sitting in the hospital chapel, waiting while the doctors tried to figure out why her little brother Micah had been having seizures. She'd been so scared, so certain that God had forgotten them. And then Pastor Whitley had sat down beside her and said, "Bethany, sometimes the darkest valleys are where God's light shines brightest." That night, Micah's seizures had stopped. The doctors called it spontaneous remission. Bethany called it a miracle. And she had written the song as a thank you note to heaven. "I'd like to sing my song, sir," Bethany said quietly. Warren Pierce stood up. "Then you are disqualified. Please leave the stage." "Warren!" Patricia's voice cracked with disbelief, but Warren was already writing something on his scoring sheet. Bethany saw the 0, large and definitive. She should have left. That would have been the sensible thing, the easy thing. But Bethany had never been particularly sensible, and her father always said that faith wasn't meant to be easy. It was meant to be true. "May I say something before I go?" Bethany asked. Warren looked up, irritation creasing his forehead. "Make it quick. I'm sorry if my faith offends you, Mr. Pierce. I really am. But 3 months ago, my 6-year-old brother was dying, and the doctors didn't know why. My mum cried herself to sleep every night. My dad stopped eating, and I felt like God had abandoned us." Her voice wavered, but she pushed through. "But he didn't abandon us. He never does. And I wrote this song because I wanted to remember that when Jesus reaches down, he doesn't just heal bodies. He heals hearts, even broken ones, even angry ones, even ones that have given up on him." She didn't wait for permission. She just started singing. Her voice, small at first, filled the auditorium. "In the valley of the shadow, when the darkness feels like home, when you're certain you're forgotten, and you're facing it alone, grace reaches down, grace reaches down, like a father who's been waiting, like a love that won't back down." Patricia Dunmore's eyes filled with tears. Several people in the audience had pulled out their phones recording, but Bethany only saw Warren Pierce. He had stood up again, but this time he wasn't walking away. He was frozen, his hand gripping the edge of the judges' table so hard his knuckles had gone white. Bethany sang the chorus, her voice growing stronger. "When the world says you're too broken, when the mirror shows your shame, when you think you're past redemption, he still whispers out your name. Grace reaches down, grace reaches down." Something was happening to Warren Pierce. His jaw clenched, his eyes squeezed shut. And then, as Bethany reached the bridge of her song, he did something no one in Ridgemont had ever seen. He sank to his knees. The gasp from the audience was audible. Patricia half rose from her seat, concerned, but Warren waved her back. He was shaking now, his shoulders trembling. Bethany kept singing, tears streaming down her own face. "So if you're standing at the crossroads and you don't know which way's true, just remember there's a Savior, and he's reaching out for you. Grace reaches down, oh, grace reaches down, through the thunder and the silence, through the lost and the found." When she finished, the auditorium was absolutely silent. Even the contestants backstage had gone still. Warren Pierce knelt at the judges' table, his face buried in his hands, and he was weeping. Patricia Dunmore stood up slowly and started to applaud. Then someone in the audience joined her. Then another. Then another. Within seconds, the entire auditorium was on its feet, clapping not for Bethany's talent, though her voice was lovely, but for something bigger than talent. For courage. For faith. For a 12-year-old girl who had chosen truth over comfort. It took several minutes for Warren to compose himself. When he finally stood, his face was blotchy and red, his eyes swollen. He picked up the microphone with shaking hands. "I need to tell you all something," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The audience quieted immediately. 23 years ago, I had a daughter. Her name was Sophie. She was 13 years old, and she loved Jesus more than anything in this world. She used to sing in the church choir, used to pray before every meal, used to leave little Bible verses on sticky notes all over our house. He paused, struggling for breath. One night, she was driving home from youth group. A drunk driver ran a red light. She died instantly. Warren's voice broke, and I hated God for it. I hated him so much that I made it my mission to scrub every mention of him from every public space I could control. I told myself I was protecting people from false hope, from a God who would let a beautiful, faithful girl die for no reason. He turned to look at Bethany, and his eyes, those cold grey eyes, were overflowing with something that looked like agony and relief all mixed together. But standing here, listening to you sing about grace reaching down, I heard Sophie's voice. Not literally. I'm not crazy. But I heard the words she used to say to me. Dad, God doesn't promise us easy. He promises us present. And I realized that for 23 years I've been so angry at God for taking Sophie that I never thanked him for the 13 years he gave me with her. I never thanked him for the joy she brought, for the faith she had, for the way she loved people. He wiped his eyes roughly with the back of his hand. Grace does reach down, Bethany, even to stubborn, bitter old men who spend 2 decades pushing it away. He looked at Patricia, then at the MC, then back at Bethany. I owe you an apology, and I owe God one too. Would you sing it again? Please. Bethany nodded, unable to speak. This time, when she sang, Warren Pierce sang with her. His voice was rough and untrained, cracking on the high notes, but it was the most beautiful sound Bethany had ever heard, because it was the sound of a heart breaking open. The sound of grace doing what grace does best, reaching down into the mess and the pain and the anger and pulling someone home. By the time she finished the second time, at least half the audience was crying. Patricia Dunmore abandoned all pretense of professional neutrality and wrapped Bethany in a fierce hug. The other contestants started filing onto the stage, and what had been a competition transformed into something else entirely. A worship service, impromptu and unplanned, led by a 12-year-old girl in a simple grey dress and a silver cross. Warren Pierce found Bethany's parents in the crowd afterward. Bethany watched as he shook her father's hand, then did something unexpected. He hugged her mother, and when he pulled back, he was crying again. "Your daughter is remarkable," he told them. "She just gave me my life back." Bethany's father, a man of few words, simply nodded. But her mother, never one to miss an opportunity for evangelism, squeezed Warren's arm and said, "It wasn't Bethany, it was Jesus. He's been waiting for you, Mr. Pierce." "I know," Warren said softly. "I know he has." The talent show never did finish. After Bethany's second performance, Warren Pierce had stood up and announced, "I resign as judge, effective immediately. I've been disqualified by my own prejudice for too long. Patricia, you take over, and for what it's worth, I think we just heard the winner." But Patricia had shaken her head. "There's no winner today, Warren. Just a whole lot of people who got reminded of what really matters." Bethany went home that evening with no trophy, no prize money, no recognition beyond the video that 7 people had posted online. By the next morning, it had been viewed 11,000 times. By the following week, over 2 million people had watched the clip of Warren Pierce kneeling at the judge's table while a 12-year-old girl sang about grace. But Bethany didn't care about the views, or the comments, or the interview requests that started flooding her parents' inbox. What she cared about was the Sunday morning 3 weeks later, when she walked into Ridgemont Community Church and saw Warren Pierce sitting in the back pew. He looked different, lighter somehow. The stone-grey eyes had softened to something closer to silver, and when he saw Bethany, he smiled, really smiled, the kind of smile that reaches all the way up to your eyes and makes little crinkles at the corners. "Hi, Mr. Pierce," Bethany said, sliding into the pew beside him. "Hi, Bethany." He held up a hymnal. "I'm a little rusty. Think you could help me find the right page?" "Sure." Pastor Whitley began the service with a prayer, thanking God for second chances and for children who listen to the Holy Spirit even when it's hard. Bethany snuck a glance at Warren and saw that his eyes were closed, his lips moving silently. When the congregation stood to sing "Amazing Grace," Warren's voice joined in, rough, untrained, but joyful. And Bethany thought about how grace really does reach down into hospital chapels and talent show auditoriums and the darkest corners of grief, into hearts that have been locked up tight for 23 years. All it takes is someone willing to sing about it. After the service, Warren approached Pastor Whitley. Bethany was gathering her Bible and her jacket, but she overheard Warren say, "I'd like to talk to you about baptism. I was baptized as a baby, but I think I need to do it again. As a choice, not as a ritual. Is that something you do?" Pastor Whitley's face broke into a wide grin. "Son, that is absolutely something we do. Bethany felt her mother's hand on her shoulder. "You did good, sweetheart," her mother whispered. "I just sang, Mom." "No." Her mother turned her around gently, making her look at Warren, who was now surrounded by church members, welcoming him, shaking his hand, inviting him to small group and Bible study. "You were obedient, and God used that obedience to reach a man who'd been running from him for more than 2 decades. That's not just singing, Bethany. That's ministry." Bethany watched Warren laugh at something one of the deacons said, watched the way his whole body had relaxed, as if he'd been carrying a boulder for years and had finally been allowed to set it down. Ministry. She supposed her mother was right, but Bethany preferred to think of it differently. She had just been willing to stand on a stage and tell the truth, even when it cost her something. And God had taken that small offering, 1 song, 3 minutes, 12-year-old faith, and done something impossible with it, which, when she thought about it, was exactly what God always did. 6 months later, Bethany stood at the edge of the church baptismal pool, watching as Pastor Whitley raised Warren Pierce up out of the water. Warren came up, sputtering and grinning, his hair plastered to his head, and the entire congregation erupted in applause. When Warren climbed out of the pool, dripping and jubilant, he walked straight to Bethany and pulled her into a soggy hug. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair. "Thank you for not giving up on that stage." "I didn't do anything," Bethany said. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't entirely true. She had done something. She had trusted. She had obeyed. She had sung. Sometimes that was all God needed. Warren pulled back and looked at her seriously. "I've been talking to Patricia Dunmore about starting a community talent program, one that encourages kids to be authentic, to share their real stories, their real faith. Would you help me? Be a part of it?" Bethany's eyes widened. "Really? Really? We need voices like yours, Bethany, voices that aren't afraid to tell the truth about grace." She nodded, feeling something swell in her chest, not pride exactly, but purpose. "I'd love to." As Warren moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and handshakes and more hugs, Bethany's little brother Micah tugged on her sleeve. "Bethy, why is everyone so happy?" Bethany knelt down to his level. Micah was 8 now, healthy and energetic, with no trace of the seizures that had nearly stolen him 2 years ago. "Because Mr. Pierce decided to follow Jesus, buddy." "Oh." Micah thought about this for a moment. "Is that why you sang that song? To help him follow Jesus?" "Sort of. I sang it because God told me to, and God used it to remind Mr. Pierce that he still loved him." "Does God love everybody?" "Yes. Even when they're angry at him, even when they think he's forgotten them. He never stops loving us, Micah, never." Micah nodded solemnly, then brightened. "Can you teach me that song? The grace one?" Bethany laughed and ruffled his hair. "Sure, little man. I can teach you." That evening, as the Crane family drove home from church, Bethany stared out the window at the setting sun, painting the sky in shades of coral and gold. Her silver cross caught the light, and she touched it gently, remembering the way it had felt to stand on that stage 6 months ago, trembling and afraid, but certain that God had called her to sing. She thought about all the what-ifs. Uguji, what if she had chosen the safe song? What if she had walked off that stage when Warren dismissed her? What if she had let fear win? But she hadn't. And because she hadn't, Warren Pierce was a new man. Literally. Old things had passed away. All things had become new, just like the Bible promised. Her father caught her eye in the rearview mirror. "What are you thinking about, Bethy?" She smiled. "Just grace, Dad, how it reaches down." He nodded, understanding. "Yes, it does. And sometimes it uses 12-year-old girls with big faith and bigger courage to do it." Bethany settled back in her seat, watching as the stars began to appear one by one in the darkening sky. Each one a reminder that even in the darkest night, light persists. Each one a small, burning declaration that God had not forgotten his creation. And somewhere in Ridgemont, In a small apartment that had been silent and bitter for 23 years, Warren Pierce was probably reading his Bible, the one Patricia Dunmore had given him after his baptism, and discovering all over again that grace was not just a concept or a theological idea, it was a person. And that person had been pursuing him, loving him, waiting for him, even when he had spent 2 decades running away. Grace reaches down. Bethany had sung it 100 times since that day in the auditorium, but she never got tired of the truth in those words, because they weren't just lyrics. They were a promise, a guarantee, a reality that couldn't be shaken or dismissed or disqualified. No matter how dark the valley, no matter how deep the pain, no matter how long the running, grace reaches down, always.